Hi, we've been talking this week on the 7-Minute Word about marriage and some of the mistakes or failures that we can make in our marriages. And part of this is that our romance and relationship world is one of the most significant things in our lives. And the Bible gives some clear instruction about marriage, but not as much as you might think. There's one verse that's repeated over and over 5 different times, starts in Genesis 2, and I've read it from Ephesians 5 this week. And it says this, it says, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife." And then it says, "And the two will become one flesh." And we've talked about the failure to cut the cord, the idea of leaving. We've talked about the failure to commit, being united. And today we want to talk about the failure to connect. And this is, I see this in this phrase, one flesh. Now, rightly, interpreters have looked at this over the years and said one flesh has to do with the sexual union. And clearly that's part of it, but it's much bigger than that. To become one flesh certainly has to do with your physical union, but it has to do also with your emotional union, getting to the heart of one another on a consistent basis. A lot of times what happens in marriages is they become business partnerships. You'll have a conversation that's just how will we take care of everything rather than getting to the heart of what somebody's feeling, experiencing, what's happening in the core of their being. And then it's not just about the physical and the emotional, but we also see that it could be about the recreational. Be one flesh means that you enjoy certain pursuits together. And to be one flesh probably has a spiritual connotation, meaning that before God, you come together and your heart is knitted with your spouse in a substantial way. Now, I'd like to, just to talk about this today for a moment, use a quote from a well-known book by a man named Ernest Becker, and then something that's maybe not as maybe highbrow as Ernest Becker, and that is Bruno Mars at the last Super Bowl. If you saw the last Super Bowl halftime show, Bruno Mars did the halftime show, and in the show, he sang one of his songs, and his song was Locked Out of Heaven. And what Bruno Mars did is he sang this song, and the song starts out and basically talks about how when he stays the night, he feels like he's born again. And then he says this, he says, "Your sex takes me to paradise. Your sex takes me to paradise. But you make me feel like I'm locked out of heaven." And if you listen to the song, there's a spiritual overtone to it. And here's why I find this interesting. What Bruno Mars is saying in his song, and it's a widespread view, is he's saying that in essence, sex is the ultimate thing. And when I feel sex, I feel closest to my being. Now, there's a sense in which what Bruno Mars is saying is absolutely right. Because marriage, when it's right, is a pre-taste of what our spiritual union is with Christ. Ephesians 5 says this when it says, I'm talking about a mystery here, a profound mystery. I'm talking about Christ and the church. He says, here's marriage, here's what you need to do. And then he says, but this is a profound mystery. It's even more than this. And so in a sense, Bruno Mars is right, but in a sense, he's wrong. And he's wrong in this way, and that is, he's made it the ultimate. And so when I talk about being one flesh and a failure to connect, one of the things that will happen in your relationship is if you make it the ultimate thing, if you make your physical union the ultimate union, then what you'll do is you'll crush that relationship with the weight that you put on it. Here's how Ernest Becker wrote about this in a book called The Denial of Death. This won the Pulitzer Prize years ago, and when Ernest Becker wrote this, he was not a follower of Jesus Christ, not a believer in that sense. He said this, he said, "We are the first society who has a widespread belief that there's no ultimate future. The first society that is truly secular. When you die, that is it. There has never been a society that's had a view of such the insignificance of human life. Therefore, there has never been a society that puts so much emphasis on finding your one true love. We secular people need to know that our lives matter in the grand scheme of things. We still want to merge ourselves to some higher meaning in trust and gratitude. But if we no longer believe in God, how do we do this? One of the first ways that occurred to the modern mind was the romantic solution. The self-glorification that human beings need in our innermost being. We now look not to God, but we look to the love partner. What is it we want? When we elevate our love partner to this position, we want to be rid of our faults, our feelings of nothingness. We want to be justified. We want to know that our existence is not in vain. Now, this was a celebrated book, but what Ernest Becker is expressing is he's saying, here's what's happened in our world today. We've made a world in which there's no spiritual reality, there is no God, this world is it. And he says, here's what that's done to us. It's made us elevate romantic love and the love partner to the ultimate thing in our lives. And what that means is that we make everything in our lives about finding and maintaining true love. And sometimes Christians will just add scripture to this, but have the same basic view. You know, we'll focus on the family and say, as long as we get our family right, then everything's right. But here's what this ultimately means for you, for me. And when I say a failure to connect, is the failure and the thing that hurts us in marriage. A failure to connect comes either because we just disregard it, or because we load too much into it and we try to get so much out of it that it was never intended to give us. And what we'll do at that point is we'll damage the very fabric, the very life of the marriage and the relationship that we're trying to create. The way that we find our way through this is to make Christ the ultimate, to realize that the best of marriage points to the ultimate relationship, and that when we give Christ that place, then we're free to give our heart to our husband, our wife, in a way that will connect us deeply and fully to them. And that's how we make a connection and we avoid the pitfall, the mistake of failing to connect.